They call him the company whisperer.
Kirk Dando.
Kirk Dando.
And Kirk Dando.
Kirk Dando.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Dando.
All right, Kurt, we have episode 4 here of the For You Leaders podcast. We're making some headway here.
That's
This is
right.
fun. So before we dive into today's episode, let's take a look back here on what we've covered to date. So just want to pause and look at that. We first exposed the early warning signs of success, and you've got your book here, Predictive Leadership, the 12 Warning Signs of Success. So we're going through, as we go through this season, just to remind everybody the 12 warning signs and how these show up and manifest within the business, but then also providing practical tools to go and address these things. So we don't want to just talk about the theoretical. We want to give people tools to go and manage that in their day-to-day business. So
Yeah, right. I mean, if information was enough, we'd all be skinny, rich, and happily married. Right? So information is not enough.
That's well said. Well, so far, let me just cover this real quick that we've covered. So we've talked about misaligned people. We've talked about misplaced promotions and leaders who say yes to growth, but not to change. And today, what we're going to be able to do is talk about the emotional cost of change. Can you kind of just set us up for today's episode?
Yeah, for sure. So a couple things. One is we talk about these 12 warning signs of success real quickly, just to interject there. You know, the reason that I came up with these is one of the things I recognize is there's really 12 critical mistakes that all or most leaders and businesses make. And that's okay. But the thing is that they can be predicted and prepared for versus what we've talked about, kind of waiting till they show up in the results and having to really react to those things and repair. So I figured that, you know, if I can arm the people, my team that I worked with, if I can arm the people that I work with tools, mindsets, as well as frameworks, that it helps them get out ahead of these things that are totally normal and part of the journey. And you're talking about the emotional cost of change. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of it. And we'd be remiss to overlook that. You know, everyone talks about, and everyone agrees with, at least everyone I've ever asked, that growth is a good thing. They want to grow. Unfortunately, sometimes the path they're on is not going to get them to where they want to go. And that's what we're talking about a little bit. But the emotional cost of change is, you know, when people say, yeah, growth is a good thing, what they don't often think about is in order to grow, change is required. And the truth of the matter is change is inevitable. I mean, we're changing all the time, just as humans, and our businesses are changing. But growth is a choice. And it's hard. It's really hard. And not just from an operational standpoint, but from an emotional and a personal standpoint. So you think about, you know, the guilt that sometimes is felt when we have to let someone go, or the anxiety that is created when we maybe promote somebody into their role and they're not performing in that role, or just the frustration that can come from setting goals and having these dreams and hopes and watching them kind of fade or not hit, you know, quarter after quarter. There's a cost that comes with that. Sometimes it's sleep, sometimes it's energy. Hopefully not very often, but sometimes I've seen where it's cost people their identity. We talked about this in an earlier podcast where Tim Keller says, success has a way of going to our head and failure has a way of going to our heart. And so Tolstoy said, you know, everyone talks about changing the world, right? But very few people, or not enough people, talk about changing themselves. And that's what's required in order to grow. And so as we go through these warning signs, as we go through the solutions and the frameworks and the mindsets, I want people to be reminded that this is part of the journey as well. So if people are feeling, you know, heavy sometimes, or conflicted or frustrated, I want to remind them that every leader in business goes through that. However, this is where I have seen it change, or where the fork in the road happens. When that pain or that suffering or even just that difficulty, it doesn't have to be dramatic, is experienced, the key question is, what do I do with this pain or this suffering? And this is true in life too. What do I do with this difficulty? And I've seen that there's two choices that people make. One is sometimes people choose to let that pain and that suffering and that difficulty transform them into something better. They're standing on real scars. They've grown in their wisdom. They've gathered people around them. They've been real and sincere about what's happening. and it makes them a better leader, a better guide, a better Sherpa. So they let it transform them. And then there's a whole population of people that I've seen that transfer that pain and that suffering and that difficulty onto others, where they end up, unfortunately, burning out. It calcifies into bitterness, into brokenness, into broken relationships, and it stalls them out. Same opportunities, same set of difficulties, same set of rationalizations sometimes. Mm-hmm. But how they think about that, do they let that pain and suffering transform them, or do they transfer it on to others? So today's episode, the next 3 warning signs of success. Houston, we've got a Rake organization.
It's my favorite names of all the warning signs of success.
Yeah, and then hope is not a strategy. Hope is wonderful, and we all need hope, but it is not a strategy. And the third one is fake values. And those aren't just operational risks. Those are actually symptoms that can cause the organization and the individuals to avoid the hard work of change and what comes with that. So today we're going to look under the hood. We're going to go beyond the people, which we talked about, kind of the people things, and we're going to looking at the systems and the structures that reinforce our ability to grow or sabotage it.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited for this conversation. One of the other ways that we've titled this conversation is when structure, strategy, and culture start to break, and what to do about that. And so I think that, this is going to be really helpful for listeners. I know you've got a lot of resources that you've created and compiled to as well that we'll be able to link in the show notes after as well. One thing I wanted to touch on before we get into the first of these is you said something earlier. There was a lot of great things that you just said here to start the episode. One of the things I wanted to touch on, though, is that change is inevitable, but growth is a choice. And I think that that's a really powerful statement, because not only is that a mindset and a framework to think through, but it also is empowering in a sense of you don't get to choose everything about growth, right? Like there's things outside of our control, but there definitely are things inside your control. And this journey of the emotional cost of change is one of those things that I think in your 30 years of experience, you've seen a lot of this we've talked about, where these leaders get decisions to, they have a decision to make on how they're going to handle this. Like you said, transforming versus transferring the pain and the suffering. So I'm excited to talk about that today with you.
Yeah, me too. It's in these moments, in these times, where I have been most blessed and honored to grow alongside really, remarkable people. They never set out to be great leaders. They set out to be great people. And I've got the privilege of a dear friend of mine giving his eulogy at his celebration of life, Rocky Turner, this past weekend. And it was amazing. There was over 600 people. People traveled from around the country, around the world to be there. And it was one of my life's biggest honors to speak about my dear friend Rocky. But we became dear friends in those moments, in those times of when there was major breakthroughs and major breakdowns, and the emotional cost of change and getting to know each other personally. And so, yeah, this is a special moment for me to share today, and the things that we're going to share, and be reminded that this is a podcast that is called for you, and it is really for the people that are listening. And I really want to encourage them once again to reach out to us on LinkedIn, through the website and those other things, not from a promotional marketing standpoint, but from let's have a conversation. We want to get better. We want to provide the guidance. We want to provide the tools. We can't, back up a dump truck and do absolutely everything here, but what we can do is listen and get better.
I love that you highlighted Rocky's story in this as well, because when we started this journey, episode 1 of the For You Leaders podcast, and if our listeners haven't heard that one yet, I highly recommend getting that to really contextualize this season. But you talked about just who those people that have been great influences on your life. We talked about the For You Leader concept, and Rocky was the first person you mentioned, and he had just passed right before we filmed that episode too. And so for us, to have that conversation, I know that was an emotional moment for you that neither of us had planned or prepared for in that episode. That was a raw, real emotional moment. And so just even to see a little bit of that emotional cost of change, I actually think that's a great reminder that you're in this just as much as anybody else. You feel the weight of people's experiences. And so when you go and you coach people, or if you're just helping somebody, like you just invited people to come and to connect and talk, you are just a person that goes along for the journey and truly takes on the weight and the emotion that person is experiencing in the journey, so that they're not doing it alone. So that's something I love about you that I wanted to call out here.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot to me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Get back to, this episode and what it's about. We've named this, where fast growth builds fragile foundations. Kind of a catchy little name, but we're really going to dig deep here on a couple things, but really identifying kind of what are those structural cracks that start to happen underneath success. And how those things, they're not always obvious. They're not, I like to say overly obvious, embarrassingly simple. Those structural cracks are not overly obvious and they're not embarrassingly simple. Oftentimes they're invisible. But when they show up, they're not so invisible. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when a company scales through force of personality, a big personality, passion, possibility. Those are all important things, but if they do it without systems and structure, it really does start to erode morale. It starts to create burnout. It starts to create unnecessary chaos. So that's what we're gonna dive into here.
Awesome. Well, let's get into the first one. Houston, we have a Rake organization. It's funny, 10 years ago, maybe 12, 15 years ago, I had a landscaping business in the summer here in the heat of Texas. Now we're having a different kind of landscaping conversation about a Rake. I'm excited to see kind of how you want to attack this, but let's start at the top. What is a Rake organization?
It's what it sounds like. It's where there's usually, one or a few people that are in the org structure through which the path of least resistance goes back to them. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a hub and spoke, and I'll draw it here in a moment. But essentially what a Rake organization is, where you have a structural blind spot with like overloaded leaders, maybe unclear accountability, that really does start to cause execution to stall out. Can't tell you how many times I've heard where high capacity leaders felt like they were really doing well, but the managers and the people that were supposed to be doing it felt a little bit demoralized and they even said, I don't think they trust me. And I've had to explain to them, it's not that they don't trust you. It's that we haven't built these patterns and these communication rhythms that unlock you. So I'm going to draw here if that's all right.
Go for it.
All right.
Get those crayons out.
Yeah, get them out. So one of the things that I talked a little bit about, and this is essentially, no one ever draws their organization this is never the formal, but this is the functional. And one of the ways that you can tell if you have a Rake organization, organizational structure drives behavior. So if you have a leader, no one ever draws it this way, but this is the way it's functioning. And when I go into an organization and I start to listen to what the business is telling me, what I will see is I look to see org structure. They'll always give me the formal one. They'll say, here it is, watch this. But real org structure is what actually happens when hard decisions have to be made. If you watch what happens, how decisions get made, is a path of least resistance back to one or a few key people. Well, this person, and it doesn't always have to be the CEO. Sometimes the Rake gets moved somewhere else in the organization. But what happens is you start to atrophy everyone's ability to make decisions, because people kind of quickly learn that if you make decisions that aren't favorable or aren't what these one or few people would really want to have happen, then you do a whole lot of work that ends up getting dismantled and redone, which doesn't feel very good. And so over time, what ends up happening, people that are really capable and know what they're able to do, what we refer to as A players, they don't tolerate that for very long. They'll go find somewhere else where they can use their skills, where they can use their abilities to really help perform and drive that organization forward. So then what you're left doing is kind of the B and C players on a team. This person, is typically either very technically oriented. They really know the product, the industry. They're able to really help grow the organization from that standpoint, or they're very external in the standpoint. They're dynamic. They're a great leader. They're externalized. They've got, the ability to kind of sell, as the saying goes, ice to Eskimos type of thing. But they're typically not great managers, leading and developing people. So what is this organization, a Rake organization, when it says drives behaviors, this drives a behavior, once again, that starts to atrophy people's muscles to make good decisions, to prioritize, to not get caught up in the chaos of too many opportunities. And so it's always reliant, at some point that breaks and fractures. Now, early on in a startup, when you don't have this many people, those things are okay. So remember, we talked about in the second episode about how a business grows, and there's that level 1, level 2, level 3. In a level 1 business, you'll find this sometimes, right? And it's okay. But sometimes I see where people start to lean on that excuse for too long, and they start to attract those kind of people. And you'd be surprised in the interview process how much you transfer that, hey, we're a hub and spoke organization. And I've seen some that are wildly successful, but the problem is when a new leader comes in, either over a division or over the entire company, that is not a hub and spoke, that is somebody that creates more of a organization where there is that engagement and that performance, it becomes super problematic because everyone there is afraid to make a decision. And this person's saying, yeah, but that's what I need. So that's where I see a lot of times entire teams getting switched out when a new leader comes in, either over a department or over the entire company, because the people that have been hired have been trained that were there to operate in an organization like this. So.
Yeah, it reminds me of when you walk through the CEO growth gauge in one of our earlier episodes, first episode. You on the bottom axis had that decision velocity broken out. And one of the things I'm hearing you say as you walk through this is it doesn't just impact your ability to make the right decision, it impacts your ability to make the right decision fast enough too.
Absolutely. Yeah, because once again, this almost creates like a human speed bump, right? I mean, it's like you can't go fast. You're like always hitting the speed bumps because you always got to be going back to some human being to do these things. We don't, and collectively, like I said, we're going to talk about strategy. We've talked about that. We're going to be talking about other ways that we've got to create clarity inside the organization. You're going to hear me say this a lot. We can all operate without certainty. We would love certainty, but we struggle without that clarity. And that clarity starts in the org structure. A lot of times I'll work with CEOs. We'll get it away for 2 days after I've gone through and done a deep dive diagnostic, and I'll take them off site for 2 days. And one of the things I have them do is say, draw your org structure for me the way it really functions. And surprisingly, they feel fairly confident they know it, but they get up there and they start to draw, and they really, really struggle on drawing. They can draw the one that they can print off. But when they start thinking about functionally how it works, and I start asking kind of probing questions and stuff like that, it starts to fall apart. And what all that tells me is like drawing org structures and getting those right are as critical as it is to pouring the right foundation for the house that you want to build. And if you don't really understand and have the right foundation, everything else on that, it becomes kind of compromised. But it's not something that's, once again, overly obvious, and it's sure not embarrassingly simple. But if we don't get it right, it does play out inside the business. And so oftentimes, one of the things that I'll talk to people about is, whatever that org structure needs to be, and people, we've got to figure out, as a CEO, what are their skills? What are their gifts? What are they good at? So if they're good at product, then maybe you can have, someone that is, a director or a VP level here. But if they're not in sales or anything else like that, you might need a real CRO, a chief revenue officer. But if they came up through that, or same thing with finance, whatever it might be. But what I encourage them to do is not put anybody's names in those boxes, but go through and draw the org structure, what really needs to happen to get the results. Once again, we're always looking at the results. What does it mean to win? What's our thesis from the first episode? What's our thesis? What's our execution? What are we trying to accomplish? What are our goals for this year? We're going to talk about that here in a minute. And then what I have them do is go through what we call role clarity. And we will put this in the show notes. We talked about that in one of the episodes. There's really 5 questions that I have people answer. Essentially, What are the musts versus the wants of this position? So if you call that a director, you'd be surprised how the musts and wants change if all of a sudden you put a C in front of that title. So once again, titles, I'm not a big one on titles, but they do matter when it comes to org structure. I've seen people, that they've got the budget in the back of their mind. So they'll say, well, we just need a director here. And it's like, you know what we're trying to accomplish? We are a product-led organization, and you're going to put a director there, and that's not your expertise. That tells me that someone they're like, well, we can't afford this. And it's like, well, let's talk about this. Maybe we can't, but can we afford not to? Let's talk about the other side of that coin and have that discussion. But once again, we don't put names to these things, even if people are already in those roles. Sometimes one of the ways to find out, you talk about right idea, wrong person. One of the ways sometimes to find out is if you have the right idea but the wrong person is to forget the name, get real clear. What are the musts versus the wants of that role? 1 year from now, if that person was wildly successful, what would we have accomplished? Behaviorally, what is it that we need? What are the 3 to 4 key behaviors that we need from this role or from this role? And you start drawing out and you start really getting into the essence, into the value of what that's needed. And then you weave somebody's name back against you. You're like, ooh, there's a gap there. Mm-hmm. A gap's not a problem. Like I said, you're not a bad leader because you have wrong people. You become a bad leader when you leave them there too long. Or you don't figure out where the gap is and coach them up. Have a real conversation saying, hey, you've got some real strengths. One of them is you're a great cultural fit. You're loyal, you're committed, you're convicted. I want you on the team, but the organization is growing. We need to grow you a little bit. And here's the things, I'm going to help you get some coaching. I'm going to spend some time with you. I'm going to invest in you, whatever the case may be. But I see too many times where that's not even thought about. Like, what do we needed in those roles? Weave the names back that are currently there. If it's a new role, that's helps you get clarity on how to go find that. So when we say Houston, we have a Rake organization, it's like, what are we going to do about it now?
Mm-hmm. This is really fascinating. So first off, you mentioned that when you sit with somebody and you go through the exercise of, hey, remove the names, remove the current existing positions, like what does the business need? You mentioned that you ask questions to help get them there. Like, what are some of these probing questions to help analyze like what's necessary, the needs versus the wants and the gaps?
If they've either underhired, they don't have the right role, they've got a structure where they've got too many people reporting to somebody or something like that, I kind of know where it probably needs to go. I'm not like 100% convinced, but it's sometimes people feel like this is manipulative. It's not. What I found is people don't get conviction if they don't understand why. Not just that it's their idea. That's ego. But they've got to understand why, and they've got to kind of get their hands on it and stuff. So I walked them on a journey of kind of asking them questions about must versus wants. I'll say, what are the musts? And that's one of the questions I ask him, and we'll kind of go through that, and we'll start to dream a little bit. And what I see is I'm unlocking something that was inside of them. All of us do this, is we give in to what we see as chaos. And subconsciously, we give up on the possibility of being able to harness that chaos. And we start to tell ourselves these sweet little lies that keep us away from the truth, that back us further and further away from the truth. That's all these warning signs are meant to do, is to pull us into the conversation closer to the truth. And so sometimes what I start to see is when I'm going through, what are the musts versus the wants? 1 year from now, what does success look like? If they were here for 6 months, what would have happened? What would be true of these things? Behaviorally, the things I was just kind of going through. These are some of the constant questions, but you almost see like this, you can almost physically see the lightning where like their shoulders, they sit up a little bit straighter. They're leaning in a little bit more into the conversation. Mm-hmm. And what's happening there is this emotional part of that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, this emotional change that's needed for growth. It's starting to invite them into what is truly possible and understand that this is broken. That's okay. And allow them to go through their org structure. Now, it does become a little bit more sobering when we start putting names back against it and the kind of lights get turned on in the room, so to speak. But it helps them understand. It helps them build conviction. And I've seen sometimes where people are saying, I know who this person is. I I have coffee with them every other week. I know exactly who fits in this. I just didn't have, it was right here in front of them. Once I pulled it back, they were like, oh, I see it now. I can see it.
Mhm. I feel like this is a good exercise too for learning how to write better job descriptions of understanding, what are the needs versus the wants and bringing clarity to the role. That PDF that we'll put in the show notes. I've personally used that. It's helped me as well when I moved from my last company to Sustainment now. That was a helpful exercise for me personally. Talk a little bit about how this can shape the hiring process for a company.
So what it does is when you go through those things, it really starts to help shape the questions that you're looking for. I'm working with a CEO right now where we are looking for a president, and it really took a lot to pull this out of him and like really allow him to be able to like, this is possible. You can have this. But he's like, well, I want somebody that does X, Y, and Z, but he felt like I can't ask for that. And it's like, you have to ask for that because that's going to be something that you are going expectation or requirement you have. I'm not going to share what it was because I don't want people judging it. But I had to encourage him, like, no, that's okay, because now we're going to shape how we go out and start asking for these things. One of the things about writing a job description that gets overlooked is they think it's either someone in HR's responsibility, or they just go, to AI and just ask it and download it and everything else like that. This is a free way to really enhance job descriptions. It's a community sport. You've got to get the people that are going to be impacted by this role, whatever it might be, to sit down and say, what are the musts? What are the wants? Behaviorally, what are we looking for? 1 year from now, if they're wildly successful, you'd be surprised how many times that tells you where the bodies are buried. They're like, ooh, yeah. Or it's like, well, here's what would happen in 1 year from now. Or you fill out where the frustrations are. It's like, yeah, if that could happen in a year from now, it'd be so magical. It's like the organization needs that magic.
Mm-mm.
It doesn't mean that you're going to get the perfect person that does every single thing every single time, but you should get as close as possible to doing that, having that awareness. And I just see too many times where people just treat this as a task. It's like another thing that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said before, no one ever argues with the point it takes the right person to get the job done. No one ever argues with me on that. But yet, about a third of the time we do it really well. About a third of the time, it's okay. They're making shots. It's not keeping me awake at night. And a third of the time, it's just terrible, just bad. There is no other area in business where you would tolerate such poor performance as you do in the hiring and promoting of people and placing them in the game. Once again, this drives behaviors. This creates a kind of organization at some point will topple, where you're going to have to become very satisfied, which is completely fine in being a level 2 company, great level 2 companies. But don't keep on frustrating yourself and losing sleep over that you're not growing because you've done this. If you want to change to that. So that's this whole Houston, we've got a Rake organization. I wanted to bring this about in the podcast for people to kind of have this understanding.
I wasn't planning on bringing this up. It just kind of came to mind. Sean Ryan interviewed Dave Ramsey on his podcast recently, and he was telling Dave, he said, hey, we were at each other's house or something. I forget what the actual context was, but he basically said, I came to you, I connected with you because I thought I needed a CEO. And Sean Ryan has kind of caught fire with his media business and whatnot. And so what conventional wisdom told him was, I need a CEO to run my business. And he told Dave this story, and Dave didn't know the story when he was interviewing him. But he said, you just looked me in the eyes and said, no, you don't. No, you need a COO. And here's why. And he walked him through the steps of that. And Sean said, he was like, from the second he left the door, he was dead set on finding exactly what Dave described. And he said, the girl you walked by when you walked in here today is that COO. And I hired her because of the conversation that we had. So I bring that up to say, I mean, first of all, this happens, and it happens on all levels of business. But second of all, that conversation of inviting somebody in to help take you, like you said, and it's so close to your face, and to be able to take it away, it can be, so simple as that. But to bring someone in who you can trust and you really look up to and aspire to be, or
And has pattern recognition.
Yeah, pattern recognition is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that story just reminds me of this, this probably happens way more than we realize it, but it also probably doesn't happen nearly enough.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an emotional toll to not getting this right, but there's a toll that happens, long before the metrics go red that happen.
There's no doubt about that. Well, just to kind of put a pin in that and then go to the next one of the notes I had for this is that your org chart isn't what you draw, right? It's what your team actually does when it needs to make those decisions. You said that earlier as you went up to the board. Let's remember that as we go into number 2 here. So number 2, hope is not a strategy. Obviously this is it feels like a kitschy saying, but walk me through this. What does this mean for the business?
Well, so what I want people to recognize is that, when ambition outpaces execution and, when you have a vision that doesn't have a system, you're most likely going to create organizational chaos. And so hope is not a strategy, really was born out of this idea that, we have these big goals, we have these big ideas. And when we were growing our company, I remember we would go off to these offsites, and I can still remember them, great locations and really great times, wonderful dinners. We would leave there feeling energized, hands stacked. And, 3, 6, 9 months later, we're like, why didn't we ever do that? That was a really good idea. Why didn't that come about? Or I would notice where the communication patterns, just the rhythms and the cadence would get lost, and just the day-to-day activities. So that's kind of the essence of why this landed on one of the 12 critical mistakes that I see leaders make. And once again, I want to remind everybody that, we tell ourselves these sweet little lies so we can avoid dealing with the truth of what's in front of us. And I want to remind again that, and I'll keep on doing it, is these things are part of the journey. These are as normal as it is for you and I to be breathing oxygen here to stay alive. That's not unusual. It's what we do with them. It's how we talk about them. It's how we get close to that truth, even if it gets warm or gets really, really hot. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some solutions to not have hope be a strategy.
That sounds great. Is this, before you kind of dive in a little bit deeper, are you speaking to a certain stage of company, or does this happen at really, both early stage, just getting their feet wet, to mature companies?
From pre-revenue to hundreds of millions of dollars. And you say, how did they get that big without it? It wasn't like it was completely void, but they've grown themselves into a level of chaos now that it's hard for them to continue to grow. So I don't know if it's necessarily size of business as much as it is, if you aim at nothing,
you'll hit it every time.
You'll hit it every time. That's right.
I love the Kirkisms.
I'm going to pull this up so we don't run the risk here of
that's a great idea
of not giving the details and me just going off the top of my head. So I'm going to walk through. This is what I call a growth playbook. Yep. Once again, it's not a product. It's not something that per se I sell. It's something I do help a lot of companies implement. But there are companies that are completely dependent upon 100%. That's all they do is help putting in operating systems, which is fantastic. It's absolutely needed. So I just want to be clear that what I'm going to go through, I want people to really hear, not the information. I'm going to do my best here to go through and tell why. Why do we do it this way? Before they do that, I'm going to actually talk a little bit about kind of what are the things that are kind of the signs that tell you that maybe hope is your strategy. So once again, this is from my book, and it's not, I'm not trying to promote the book as much as I don't have this good of a memory. So, so here's a couple things. You think you have a long-term strategy in place, but you keep hearing, we're not sure where we're going, or the goals aren't being met, or people are floundering, or we're working hard, but in a disconnected way, or we need better accountability. You start to hear, and I'll share some more of these phrases, but you start to hear, those can be signals of like, I may want to stop and think about this. When asked, most people in your company cannot tell you what are the 3 to 5 goals for this year. They can maybe tell you what we've got 30 or 50 or we've got 20, or they're always changing, but they can't clearly with conviction. Now, I'm not talking about being able to memorize them and parrot them back. I'm talking about conviction. You find yourself hoping that hard work, long hours, and stress you and your leadership team put into the business will create successful, sustainable business, even if you doubt that anything is actually going to be accomplished. Your strategic planning process produces a lot of really great ideas, but vague next steps and a lack of accountability causes the actual implementation to stall out. Your leadership team doesn't present a united front. In the earlier episode, I drew a circle that represented the business with leaders and then arrows kind of going every which way, which it represents the communication. Call that whether you've got a scattered focus, and that gets you scattered results. And so you start to see where that starts to, people don't draw it or think about it. Once I draw it, they're like, that kind of feels like what's happening for us. Your employees cannot confidently state what winning looks like, and more importantly, what they contribute to that. Once again, it's not about trying to answer the question. It's about what's the conviction? What's the clarity? Remember, we need to be bringing clarity. Leaders do not know how or when to say no. They say yes to too many things, causing the organization to lose focus or be led into the fog. Obviously, no one's meaning to do that, but that's, once again, these are things where we've got to have this truthful conversation. Sometimes that's where I'm helping them get closer to the truth, because I've gone and listened to the business. I say, Kirk, we're not doing that. And I'm like, all right, well, let's walk through this. Rather than me saying, yes, you are. And they say, no, you're not. Yes, you are. No, you're not. That's not helpful. What's helpful is for somebody to understand it, to somebody be walked politely, gently, but forcefully into the truth. When you state your audacious goals to the team, they say they don't believe that we can get there, or worse, they say it outside the meeting. The company rewards busy work instead of results. A lot of times growing organizations confuse activity for progress or effort for results.
That's a common one.
Yeah. When you ask mid-level team members how their work helps move the company forward, they don't know how to answer you. They either don't know the goals or they don't understand how their specific work impacts the bigger picture. Those are just some things and these are things that I didn't dream up. These are a lot of times where I'm hearing when I'm going in and starting to listen to the business. So I'm going to walk through the growth playbook here. And once again, what I'm not doing this is for people to try to imitate this or what I'm wanting people to think about, do we have this? Why are we asking these questions? Because it's building a behavior. I'm always trying to build the right muscle set and the right behaviors inside the organization for us to create that decision velocity, for us to be able to execute at a high level. And so there's a method to the madness. So some of the indications that you may be experiencing this warning sign called hope is not a strategy. You hear stuff like, we need more communication. We have more ideas than we have time to do them. We have too many meetings. What are our goals? Why do we keep changing directions and our goals? We need to make decisions faster. We need better alignment. We're all working hard, but in a disconnected way. We're not as focused as we should be. These are all like little grains of sand in the gears of productivity. And once again, they in themselves are not bad, okay? But this is where I see is we give in to what we feel is normal, which is really chaos, and we give up the hope that something can change. And I'm here to tell you, the environment can be harnessed. We're going to show you how, okay? So one of the things that I find out is too many businesses have a great thesis, that thesis we talked about, or strategy, but it's just not working. It's just not quite coming together the way they want, or there's just bad parts of the thesis or the strategy, things that maybe we thought were going to work that didn't work, but they're not corrected fast enough. So they live in that. And the main culprits are there's not a clean and clear communication allowing the strategy to come to life through ruthless prioritization. Not reckless chaos, ruthless prioritization and structure. There's a culture of sporadic accountability. There's pockets of accountability, but it does not permeate across the organization. There's not a programmatic way to introduce and deal with change that, like I said, a plane flying somewhere. So we don't actually have a system or process on how we deal with change. We've unintentionally developed what I call react and repair muscles versus predict and prepare muscles. And we don't really know how to build those. One of the things we're going to go through, so I'm kind of going through this growth playbook. I'm starting at 10,000 feet to kind of describe the dynamic, the characteristics, the circumstances. Then I'm going to go down to 5,000 feet and tell you how we build something that allows that. Now I'm going to get down to the ground level and tell you why we're asking certain questions. So stay with me here. This is a little bit of a long trip here, but it's a trip
it's worthwhile.
I think people hopefully will appreciate. Decision velocity is starting to decelerate. Leaders are doing more catching than coaching. What I mean by that is not catching people doing stuff wrong, but catching by doing their job for them. Not really training and developing. Instead of coaching. Looking for those coachable moments. Every single day there's these coachable moments. Now, if you're having the same coachable moment with somebody over and over again, that's a different conversation. But I see too many times where we don't think about the process of, like, I'm in the driver's seat, you're in the passenger seat, so I'm going to teach you how to drive. I'm going to talk to you, and then I'm going to put you in the driver's seat, and I'm going to move over to the passenger seat. And at some point, I'm going to move to the back seat, like it's it's Uber or something, and then I'm going to get out of the car, and you're going to drive the car. And then teams are respectful, but the trust is low. Not trust that what the words that are leaving your mouth are honest and accurate. Trust that you're actually going to do what you said you're going to do. Trust that you can do what you said you can do. And that creates fractured focus and kills performance. So, a lot of times when it comes to doing strategic planning of any type, there's a scale. And I see where at times, it's more about the mechanics and less about the mindsets. So we've got to be able to coach and develop the mindsets of how do we create conviction? How do we create people that are better at predicting and preparing versus reacting and repairing? Reacting and repairing is fun because it's like you work long hours, you show up at the last minute, you pull out the whiteboard, you're fixing, you're the hero. But no one ever stops and says, that wasn't necessary. We could have seen this coming and done so. In fact, we did see something come about it. We just waited until it showed up in the results. And those people that show up and when they're reacting and repairing, unfortunately, sometimes are the people that are getting their promotions because they're thinking uniquely and strategically on their feet. They're working the long hours. They're getting the kudos and slack and everything else like that. And the person that saw the problem, didn't let it show up in the results, and did something about it, no one knows. So it's almost, it's just, but anyway, so there's the mechanics, all these different strategic planning ways of going about it and styles and everything else like that. But the mindsets have got to be something that doesn't just happen. We don't just go to an offsite for 2 days. Because what I see a lot of times is people go to those offsites for 2 days and their minds are broad and they think bigger and they come up with something that's really fantastic. And then they go back to their job and it gets smaller. They're in their lane and they don't have a way to really raise their head back up again on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to really look at that. So now they got their OKRs, their names are next to them. Those are the ones they're focused on. If they see somebody else not performing, we don't really have a culture where I can really call you on that. We don't really have a structure where asynchronous I can say, hey, what's going on with this? We said this was going to be done or something like that. It's just like, nope. So we go away, big thank you, come back, small thing. And we've got to pull that forward into those weekly, monthly, and quarterly discussions. So we got to get that where we balance that scale. It's not just the mechanics. We got to get the mindset and build that in going forward. So 20,000 feet, let's move down to 10,000 feet here. So how the growth playbook gives you both the mechanics and the mindsets to grow, to scale. People say, oh, that structure's too heavy. We're too small. We don't really need that. That's not what that ends up happening is it just gets diffused. All these great ideas and everything else like that really don't come together. And so we need that structure. Structure doesn't mean that you're selling out. It means you're growing up. And so it's important. So structurally, what happens is it starts with what I call the pillars, the strategic pillars. And the pillars endure the test of time. They are the components of a business that are always, you've got to be focusing on and worrying about. Usually in strategic planning, without the pillars, I usually see people talk mostly about growth. What's our revenue going to be? They're all growth oriented, which is a critical pillar of a business, whether you are for profit or not for profit. You are there for impact, which requires growth. Growth requires change. Most people don't want change, but nonetheless, and they don't commit themselves to the process of it, is what's really critical. This is part of the process that we're talking about here today. And so the pillars, usually you have one pillar that has to do with growth. And you usually have one pillar that has to do with something about being operationally excellent. We're able to call the shot and make the shot. You usually have a pillar that's something to do with customer empathy, putting the customer at the center, at the focus of things. And then you usually have one pillar that has to do with being a great place to work. We attract not just the best talent, we attract where people want to come here, they want to build their career. And when they leave us and go do something even better, and we're more proud of them. And the reason that I break those down, and you might have one more, and people, I always encourage them, name them, things that have deep meaning to you. Don't just call them growth, people, customer, something that fits the vocabulary of the business. And I've seen people use all kinds of terminology to name those different things, but that resonates with the people in the business for each one of those. Because when you're at the offsite, what the next step is those pillars sit on a foundation. That foundation is your thesis. It is your mission. It is your values. We're going to talk about fake values here in a moment, and that warning sign and what to watch out there. But the pillars sit on the foundation. I had a CEO, I think you got a chance to listen to the phone call that left me a message that I'd taught this to a long time ago. I mean, it touched me. The call, Susie Sosa, I can't remember what she calls this. She calls this like Temple of Growth or something. I don't know what she calls it, but I build it like it's a house. But anyways, there's a foundation and then there's those pillars. And if you just had the foundation, you just had the mission, vision, values, thesis, and you had those pillars, that's not enough. Remember, I said we can operate without certainty, but we need that clarity. So how do we create clarity around each of those pillars? How do we inform the people in the business? How do we help advocate for the business around those things? The reason I segment those things is because we need to be thinking about how to make each one of those better. Our growth. What are we doing to be the best place to work? What are we doing to really have that customer empathy? I hear so many people talk about, oh, let's put the customer at the center and everything else like that. But then I watch their actions, how they spend money, how they make decisions. And the customer is nowhere near the center. Nowhere near the center. Sometimes you got to save the customer from themselves. I get that. But you got to have enough of a relationship to care enough to do that. But most of the time, you got to really get into the mindset of what is it that they need. I had one company that grew significantly quickly. And one of the things that early on we said is like, you need to get in suite with the customers, literally next to them and see what was happening. They had designed an entire product that they'd started selling. It was okay. Once they completely said what we're making and what the product we're developing, as much as we're in love with it, it's useless. This is what they need. And they pivoted, which was hard. It was a change to their thesis. And the business exploded simply because they truly put the customer at the center. So that pillar, and operational excellence. What is it we doing? What do we need to get better? What about our meetings? What about, our cadence of communication? What about how we, draw our work structure, how we're writing job scripts, whatever. You can't fix it all at once because that does create drinking the chaos Kool-Aid, which is another.
Next episode.
Yeah. Next episode, we'll talk about that. But I want people to understand why those pillars are there. I want to understand structurally why they're there is because when we go to the offsite, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, all right, for each one of those pillars, what needs to be true 1 year from now? So in our growth, what needs to be true? Oh, our revenues need to be this, our churn needs to be this, or whatever it might be. And you might come up with 10 different things, but you need to pick like overall for the business, I strongly encourage people to have 3 to 5 goals, not for each pillar, for the entire business. So you might have you might say, well, gosh, we don't have any goals for our customer empathy, or we don't have any goals for our, being a great place to work. You may not need those because those may be performing at a high level. We need to pay attention to them and they need to be on our roadmap of success, but they aren't maybe on the critical parts of that. But anyways, 3 to 5 goals for the business in total for the year. Now those can change and adjust, like I said, a plane flying somewhere, but that's like changing your destination in flight. You can do it, flying to Denver, but all of a sudden we're going to go to Seattle. That's okay. Still both great towns, but can't go to both.
Yep.
Okay. So for each one of those, so we're saying, all right, what is it for growth? What about our customer empathy? However we name that, 1 year from now, what needs to be true? But what we're doing is we're flushing all these ideas out of people and getting all their good thinking. And you can hear the tone in the room, and you can hear the energy in the room, and you can see where there's agreement, where there's disagreement. But we're flooding this all out of people, and we're building context that we're now going to pull in each week, each month, each quarter going forward. That's why we're doing this. Okay. We're having, once again, I want people to really be listening. Why are we doing all this? So that is not enough to drive that clarity. So now we've got our foundation, we've got our pillars. That 1 year from now is what I call it objective. Now there's all kinds of stuff that have been written about objectives. I know a lot of people do quarterly objectives where they have quarterly objective and key results. There's a million ways to do this. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I like to have where the objective is 1 year from now. Because I like people to have to call the shot and say, here's the 3 to 5 things that we are going to accomplish this year. I'm going to talk about in another episode something that's called a 5x5 that does something similar, but nonetheless.
I was going to ask you a question on that too. So do you like to align the 1 year? You mentioned like through the process of like thinking a year out. Obviously you don't go into these companies at the start of a fiscal year every time, but is it natural to try and tie that to a fiscal year, or are you just thinking literally like a year from today?
That's a great question. Usually it's fiscal year, and sometimes there's so much going on, we'll say it's 6 months, but we do time box it. Sometimes it's like, listen, if we don't get through these next 6 months,
You're not going to have a next fiscal year.
yeah, year. And once again, this process evolves over time. The first time it goes through, people end up with way too many goals, way too many. And I want to encourage you, that's okay. Do not work through the door of perfection. Do not walk through the door of perfection, but do walk through the door of purpose and intentionality. So I've seen where people end up with their eyes were too big for their appetite, and they end up with way too much. And I let them kind of do it because it's okay, because to try to get them down, it's just, at some point it becomes a beating. It's like, people get tired. And but I know that we're going to be talking about this every week, every single month, and we'll adjust it. Remember those waypoints. We'll fix it. So don't worry about if like, oh no, we have 10, or oh gosh, we've got 15, and we've got too many KRs. Just get close to the truth and say, all right, let's do something about it. Because what ends up happening is a strategy without structure is nothing more than a to-do list. And that's what happens when you have too much stuff. It just becomes everybody's to-do list.
Well, one thing I think you're describing here too is you need to do what is ultimately helpful. Like it's not about being right, it's about doing right at the end of the day. And so whether that's, you may have 3, you may have 5, you may have 10, it may be OKRs, it may be something else, you may not have OKRs, and that these are not the markings of successful businesses. Successful businesses figure out what works for them and how they grow and how they scale. There still are key principles, and I think you're describing that through this growth playbook that help ground you in that process. Yeah. And it's important to bring somebody from the outside in to help you kind of guide you through that process as well. Because we all have blind spots, right? At the end of the day. But ultimately, we're not trying to replicate and make every company look like some exact model.
And that's the beauty of this is there's a framework, but it's completely blends and bends to what is needed for the size of the organization, for the people that are there, for the industry it's in, for the dynamics and stuff like that. There are principles of growth that are consistent. The application of them is what kind of is where the difference becomes magical.
Oh, that's really crucial.
Yeah. And you said we all have blind spots. Thank goodness we don't all have the same ones.
Yep, that's right too. Yeah, you drew earlier up on the easel here. You talked about the CEO and figuring out what are the specific strengths of that CEO, and what are the blind spots? Did they come up through product? Did they come up through sales? Right. So to your point, I mean, we're not all going to have the same blind spots as well. And in coaching to the good things about that CEO and the good thing about that team versus the things where the team needs to mature and grow and where the gaps lie is really important and will look different in every business. Yeah,
very, very, very true. So, and it's important as part of this process. So now we've got our 1 year from now. Okay. We've kind of used the pillars to help us think, like what are growth? Each of those pillars, that's kind of that forcing function. So we don't get too narrow in our thinking. Going broad, then we're going to go narrow. Now it's if that's true 1 year from now, now we've got to think about, here's the things we got to do. What's got to be true in 90 days? So we reverse engineer.
Mhm.
So we've got our destination. What's our first waypoint? So those are our KRs. So if our objective is 1 year from now, our KR, and once again, there's all kinds of different way people use these, but give them whatever name you want. The concept is 1 year, 90 days.
It's a waypoint.
Yeah, it's a waypoint. So what are those? And you should maybe have for each goal, maybe 3 to 5, 3 better than 5 KRs. The KRs have got to be measurable. The objectives, it's good if those are measurable. They can be, aspirational, but the KRs have to be measurable. They have to be measurable both in time frame, 90 days, and something that we can say yes or no to. You can do subjective grading. Sometimes it's on a scale of 0 to 10. I would encourage not to do that as much, but sometimes it's like life is getting better.
Mhm.
Okay, that's important. On a scale of 0 to 10, where are you at today? I'm at a 5. Okay, all right. Well, what's going to make it a 10? Well, we have to do this and this and this.
Mhm.
But that's when I talk about subjective grading, that's what I'm talking about. But
Versus
KRs,
like we have 30% churn, now we have 20% churn.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Your example is better than the subjective one, but sometimes it's appropriate given the circumstances. So now we've got our foundation. We've got our pillars. We've thought through each one. What are the goals? We've got 3 to 5 goals for the company. Now we've talked about what our KRs are. Okay. So now we know what's going to happen. So we've got this waypoint. So what happens is for each month, so if we've got 1 year, 90 days, now we've got to think about what's our monthly route check. So if we're flying somewhere, that's still not enough to get clarity. Remember, we're trying to drive clarity here. That's what we're trying to do, is get clarity into the organization, build behavioral habits that cause us to become able to predict and prepare. We're things that cause people to grow in their roles, so the business doesn't grow faster than they do and they end up getting left behind. There's all these things behind the scenes that we're trying to build in. So all these things. But the first thing is we got to get everybody on the same page. That alignment, remember, starts with clarity. That's what we're doing. That's why we're having all these conversations and picking it apart in pillars and doing all these different things. Intentionally getting it out, getting it on the table, cleaning it up, kind of unpacking that messy old closet that you have at home. We're starting to put it back away, the neat parts. So each month, and I'm going to talk to you about how we take this down to weekly. A lot of times when people talk about their KRs or their objectives, they talk about what? We're on track, right?
Mhm.
Okay, well, this is, I want people to really hear this, because it's not a difficult concept, but I see where people struggle with it, is if I've got an objective 1 year from now, okay, I want to know if I'm on track. Okay, that's good. But I've got these KRs underneath it that are supporting it. These are my waypoints, my KRs. Okay. What I see a lot of times, people, they talk about the KRs. Am I on track? That's, to me, is mildly helpful. What I want to know is, what's your confidence level that this KR is going to deliver that objective? I see too many times, once again, this is a careful part I want people to hear. I see where they talk about, they say my KR is on track and I have confidence I'm going to do that KR. But that doesn't help me. I want to know, does that KR actually going to deliver the objective? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying there. So, because oftentimes when you're flying, you realize that waypoint is not going to, and I have to change. That KR is not going to deliver that objective. So, for example, you might say, we're going to allocate 16.5% of our R&D to completing and prioritizing infrastructure tickets to reduce those. And so, are we on track? Yeah, we're on track, but my confidence level is low because we're still having infrastructure issues. That allocation of that was the wrong thing. We thought it was when we were sitting there for those 2 days, and everyone thought it was a brilliant idea, but the results are telling us something different. We've got to pick a different KR. And that's when you hear people say, we're changing our goals, we're doing this. No, we're changing our waypoints because we have better information, but we have not lost sight of our destiny, our objective, where we're going. It's really, I'm going to say it one more time. Look at the KRs. It's fine to say if they're on track, but your confidence level has got to be confidence level that KR is going to make us achieve that objective. And we shouldn't have 18 of them. We should have the most critical ones. And people are listening are probably thinking, okay, that happens at the executive level, and that's where I'm talking about this. What about on my team? Well, they should double click down. So they should have theirs that ladder up to those things versus I see all the times where teams, they're like, well, we're going to go off and do our own OKRs. I'm like, that's like a road to nowhere. Like, how does that map back into the overall business and the 3 to 5 goals of how's this ladder up? How's this ladder down? Everyone feels good because they've got an OKR and their name's next to it. And we talk about it each week. That's where you're unintentionally confusing activity with progress.
Mm-hmm.
That's why that starts to happen. They've got a ladder up and they've got a ladder down. This takes effort and time to build this infrastructure. But once again, over time, it evolves. It becomes like blinking. You don't even have to hardly think about it. But in the beginning, it's like riding a bike for the first time. It's not, it's tough.
I feel like writing OKRs is not natural either for those who haven't done it or haven't done a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
I know the first OKRs I wrote, I look back on and I would say those were probably not even actually OKRs. So.
Exactly. And that's okay.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. That was really well done.
But that is okay. And that's part of this journey. That's normal part of the journey, right?
Right.
You're normalizing that. You're teaching somebody, saying, the first ones I wrote were, we'll just write them and we'll work with them and I'll teach you or that's fine. Life will go on. We're going to be discussing these because but I'm getting ready down to the ground level, like how do we actually implement all this information? All we're talking about now is information. So now you've got your foundation, you've got your pillars, you've got your 1 year from now, you've got your 90 days from now, you've got this monthly route checks, this weekly. So what? Now what?
Yeah.
How do we implement this? Most communications happen in some kind of meeting inside of a business. I'm telling you, one of the things I most commonly hear is our communications aren't working. It's not because we don't have enough meetings or Slack or whatever, whatever forms of communication that we have, even in this distributed work from home environment.
I was about to ask you on that. Yeah.
We've got lots of communication. One of the things that I have people do when I go through, I ask them, tell me about your meetings. How do they work? How often do you have them? This and that and everything else like that. And I say, on a scale of 0 to 10, with this criteria, the meetings are a good use of time. They drive good accountability and the right people that need to be in the meetings are in the meetings. Those are the criteria on a scale of 0 to 10. And I'm telling you, I've asked thousands of people this question. On average, what do you think the grade is?
6.5, 7.
Pretty good. 6.2.
6.2. That's pretty good.
That's a solid F plus.
Yep.
If my grandkids, your kids, are bringing home 62s, you better have a basement.
The apple
because they're going to be with you for a long time.
The apple doesn't fall far from the tree if they're doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I can teach them how to just get by.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Yeah.
In all seriousness, I had an organization where I went through and did this with several of their leaders. A brand name that if I said it, people would recognize it. Just in that room, I had them go through and figure out how many hours they spend in internal meetings, not external with customers and else, internal meetings in a week. I had them taking times 52 to come up with a year. I had them figure out what their annual salary was divided by 2,080, which is how many hours in there. They probably worked more than that, but we're just kind of spitball on it. I had them do the math. How much money do you think they spent inside of meetings?
Over what period of time?
A year.
A year. I wanted to say my gut was like $1 to $2 million.
$27 million.
Jeez.
$27 million. Just in salary. That's not opportunity cost. Before I did that, I had them go through and grade their meetings. I think they were like a 6.4 on a $27 million a year investment. Yeah. And so at the end of every single meeting, not a beat down, not 5 minutes, really quickly, they just go around and say, with criteria, not just how'd you feel today, but criteria is like, this is a good use of time. For them, it was because people didn't show up on time. They said people showed up on time, it was a good use of time, and people were prepared. Meaning discussions were decision or discussion ready. Meaning if you needed a pre-read, somebody sent it out or whatever. For them, that's what they graded on. Over the course of a year, they went from that 6 point whatever it was to, I think, 9.3. They didn't get the 9.8. Had the biggest financial turnaround they'd had in the history of this company. This company had been around for decades. Biggest financial turnaround they'd had and grew significantly from there. Was it because they started grading meetings? Not 100%, but they would tell you it had a significant role because it created more clarity. People showed up to meetings that were running the meetings prepared. When meetings were necessary, they got canceled. And they sat there and they really talked about what it was that mattered. So let's talk about our strategic planning. How do we go in and do that? So weekly meetings, weekly check-ins. It starts with you open with the personal business highlights of the business, and this will all be in the show notes. And once again, they've done all kinds of studies. You shouldn't open a meeting and just jump into stuff. So follow this cadence. Then you go into your OKRs. Are they on track? And do we have confidence that those KRs are going to deliver on those things? That should only be about 10 minutes. The next is what I call the predict, discuss, and solve section. PDS, predict, discuss, and solve. This is 60 minutes of the meeting. It's a 90-minute meeting once a week. Some companies are small enough they don't need to do this. They need to do it every other week, once a month. But generally speaking, what happens is before the meeting, have people go in and have them go through and identify what are the things we want to discuss ahead of the meeting. Don't do your homework inside the meeting. Do it before the meeting, because what we're doing is this is that part where I'm trying to get people to go back to those 2 days when they were thinking big. If you set time on your calendar and you have to go through everybody's OKRs, you're thinking bigger. You're going back. You're reminding yourself that time, and you're asking questions. You're not just commenting on yours, but you're looking at everybody's and seeing how those are performing. So you go into that PDS section, which is 60 minutes. We're only talking, this is called management by exception. We're talking about building trust. Trust, remember I said one of the problems is we don't trust what people are going to do. So now we've got to trust in the fact that we're building trust by management by exception. I'm only going to talk about the things that matter. We're not talking about, it's not show and tell. Everybody gets to talk about every single line item. It's just the things that matter. It's a 90-minute meeting. After the PDS section, we have action items. Action items are the things that have a 2-week shelf life. Meaning, a lot of times, once again, how you adapt to change is people will end up with action items that are truly strategic goals. They just didn't get discussed at the offsite. So you've got to be able to complete an action item within 2 weeks, give or take. And the reason for that, it's the why behind that. It's a forcing function for people to have to, one, be accountable. We're trying to help not have sporadic accountability. But more importantly, is if something is going to take longer than that and take more resources, we have to go up and horse trade with our OKRs that are above and be able to be like, that's actually more important than this one. This one we're going to have to delay the time on, or it's going to come down, or whatever the case may be. But we're forcing that conversation that rarely happens. It just gets tracked in extra stuff. Mm-hmm. Then we have signal strength messages. We as an executive team or as a departmental team, we're having a discussion. What are the signal strength message we need to get out to the rest of the organization so it doesn't get lost in a vacuum? So we're very intentional about thinking, hey, we just discussed these 3 things. We need to make sure these teams know it, or the organization knows it, or our next all hands, whatever. And then we end the meeting by grading the meeting, 5 minutes. Quickly go around the table, grade the meeting on some set of criteria. I always tell people if somebody is a 6 or below, they have to say what would make it a 10, just so we can get better. It's about getting better. It's not like bringing a grade home from school. So that's your weekly meeting. That's 90 minutes. Okay. Monthly follows the same cadence. Okay. And I've got examples of, different ways to track this that we'll show in the show notes. Monthly, it's the same thing. The only thing we're adding is, so we open with the business personal highlights, 5 minutes. The monthly one is usually 3 hours long, half a day sometimes, depending on the size of the business. What we're adding in is scorecard, our KPIs. Now you can add those into the weekly if you want. Once again, this is not formulaic, but I'm saying these are the things that get added. So you open with the business personal highlights. Sometimes fun questions. Would you rather be, 4'8" or 7'3"? Or what would be your walk-up song if you play baseball? Whatever. Fun questions to get to know each other quickly around the table. Get to the meeting. KPIs next. OKR check-in, 10 minutes. Once again, it shouldn't even take that long because people should have gone through and picked it out. Our predict, discuss, and solve. Now we're going to spend 2 or 3 hours because there's some things that maybe we've been discussing in the weeklies we didn't have time to go deep on, but we've captured that and we brought that, and we're going to go a little bit deeper on those things, different strategic things. Then we have just 5 minutes for talking about focusing for our quarterly offsite. I'm going to talk about quarterly how we need to be able to meet, and a lot of times the best discussions happen in those weekly meetings or those monthly meetings, but then they never make the agenda. I can't tell you how many times I've helped people build agendas and they're just like, well, let's start building something. It's like, I guarantee there's been things that have come up in your meetings over the last 3 months or that you wanted to double down on, bring a customer in, you wanted to bring, maybe certain people from different teams in to talk about a strategic item or whatever, and it evaporates and gets forgotten. So we capture those action items. Once again, go back to the action items, new ones from this meeting, and then we spend time on the ones that we have. We talk about them real quickly. Did you get it done? Yes or no? If you want to talk about it, put it up in the PDS section, the predict, discuss, and solve section. Otherwise, it's just yes or no. I trust you. If you tell me yes, once again, we're building these conditions of trust. I'm building these behavioral things. Signal strength messages. Once again, we've just spent 3 or 4 hours in a meeting. Other teams know, or the company knows we've been in this meeting. Let's share, what it is, grade the meeting, and then we're done. So that's monthly. Quarterly, it is no different, but it's usually a 2-day meeting. Sometimes it could be a 1-day meeting. We just have a little bit more time. So you open with the business personal highlights. Maybe it's 30 minutes. I've had people do fun things like everybody brings a picture of them when they're a baby and everyone has to guess who that is, or whatever, just fun stuff. There's a million things you can do. Then the next one is a homework. We'll maybe spend 2 hours. That's where we may bring pockets of teams. Sometimes we want to bring people into our executive meetings or into our team meetings to see how we function. Maybe they're up and coming leaders. We want them to see, how the sausage is made or whatever the case may be. And so they're going to come and maybe observe, or they're going to come and they're going to present on a part of the business that they've been working on, or we're going to have a customer come and talk to us. The sky's the limit on what's possible, but that's kind of what I call that homework session. Then we have our scorecard review, our KPIs, 30 minutes, our OKRs, because they're quarterly. The objective hasn't changed, but we're going to be refreshing those KRs. They're 90 days at a time. So now the people that are responsible for those objectives have gone about and brought the people about and are going to come and cuss and discuss. Here's what we think the next 90 days of waypoints in order to hit that objective that we were talking about. We're refreshing those rather than talking about are they on track and our confidence level. We're actually refreshing those. So it's kind of a mini annual offsite, just quarterly. We have 2 hours for our predict, discuss, and solve. Now we're going to go deeper. Maybe we heard something from the homework session that, we didn't want to comment on, in that moment, but now we're going to go deeper. That night, go out to a team dinner. Next day, we have 2 more hours for the predict, discuss, and solve. Then we're going to spend that time setting those next quarterly objectives. 3 hours for that. Then I always encourage people, and this is something that I rarely see happen, but I've seen powerful, incredible movements happening in companies. Set 2 to 3 hours to discuss culture. And not just broadly. I've seen people say, well, one of the things we need to get better is on our onboarding. And they've come up with really fantastic, neat ideas. I've seen people come up with scavenger hunts. They have to go and learn the CEO, where they went to school, what are SOPs on this or whatever, but they created some fun with a scavenger hunt. And at the end of it, they have kind of a little dinner or whatever the case may be that came out of a discussion in the culture section. I just came from an offsite where it got, a little bit emotional, heated, because there were some things that the CEO was doing, and he was bold enough to kind of call himself out on it and facilitated and have me help facilitate that conversation around culturally what was happening. And there was a real breakthrough because some people got some things off their chest that they went back and it's like the air had been let out of the balloon and they just, felt this release. So there's a section in the quarterly to talk about culture. Then we have our action items. What do we, once again, what's been done and what are the new ones from this meeting? Signal strength messages, and then the meeting's graded.
Introducing the growth playbook, you said that it's not about what, right? Like not about implement this pillar strategy and everything exactly as is, and you'll hit your OKRs and it'll lead to these things. It's more about why are we doing these things? And so the importance of that, I think, really shines through of like, you can totally be on track or above, your OKRs, but maybe you write bad OKRs or maybe things changed, right? Since you wrote them, and maybe they were good OKRs when you wrote them, but now they're not. And so just a path to getting there, it's a matter of learning how to exercise that muscle. I think that's how you described it, or at least I think it's a good way of describing it is there's certain muscles of accountability, muscles of intentionality. And I think you said to predict and prepare, just that preparedness, that the preparation that goes into showing up day in and day out for the success of the business and for the team as a whole. What this model is doing, the why behind it, the silent catalyst, I would say, to this is you're training people how to use muscles they're not, standardized going to use on their own.
Yeah, that's very well said. I appreciate you calling that out. And once again, a little bit of what I want to encourage people that are listening is this is a little bit hard to translate inside of a podcast. And I get that. And I understand and I can appreciate that. But that's where you're invited to reach out to us and ask questions and stuff like that. Once again, goal here is not to try to sell you something. Goal is to try to help whoever's listening that wants to get better, to come alongside them, to be that Sherpa. That's what I've said from the beginning. That's what I say in our introduction. My job is simple. It's to unlock something that's inside of people. And so if there's something that was said here or didn't make sense or wasn't, we couldn't fully drill down on or didn't translate, visually, ask questions. Kind of the last piece of this is like, when this is done right, remember what I said, the causes were for all those comments, like we need more communication, we're working hard in a disconnected way. What happens when you have that clean and clear communication? It brings that strategy to life through ruthless prioritization and structure. I just went through, a finite amount of detail in a short period of time. That's going to cause communication, that weekly, that monthly, that quarterly, that agenda that follows a certain path, that each line item of that agenda has a very specific purpose. The culture of accountability. It's hard to show up every week, every month, every quarter and say, it's on track and I have confidence, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen. It falls off the table. At some point you get coached up or coached out in doing that. We create an environment of true transparency and true accountability. Remember, accountability is not about saying you're doing what you said you're going to do. It's about, if I'm not able to do it, to renegotiate for whatever reason. Other things have come up. There's a million reasons, whatever it might be. They're not excuses, but they're real legitimate business reasons why that changes. Change is being introduced effectively. So we're not having stuff living down in our action items because they have a shelf life of 2 weeks. If it's going to be longer than that, it at least forces a discussion saying, hey, does this take more resources? Should this be up in our OKRs? If it's going to, we can't go higher more. So what's got to give? It causes those uncomfortable conversations versus saying, which we're going to talk about in other warning signs of success, is it helps avoid that drinking the chaos Kool-Aid when everything's urgent, nothing's important, type of thing. We've developed these predict and prepare muscles. We're forcing people to think ahead, to be able to look at our objectives. We've created that necessary clarity about saying, here's the handfuls of things we're going to do. Here's why they matter. Here's what it means to our existence. Here's what it means to our customers, those kind of things. And we're causing people to always be thinking about, am I in pursuit of that? And what am I doing each day, each week, each month? Matter or not? At least we're forcing that inside of real conversations. We can become numb to it and look the other way. But that's, once again, growth is a choice. Change is inevitable. Teams experience high levels of trust and winning because now we're in this thing. Even if things aren't working, we see everybody's not just effort, but we see their results. We see how they're communicating. We see they're good critical thinkers. And when they're not, they're open to getting that coaching. Like I said, we all have blind spots. Thank goodness we don't all have the same ones. And we're using the power of our team, of our people, to get better collectively and not trying to show up with a cape on and be a hero. Leaders are doing more coaching than catching because we've created this mindset. Remember, I talked about mindsets versus mechanics. These are all mindsets. I'm thinking about where are coachable moments. I'm not letting that person frustrate me. That's just a coachable moment. One of the probably the most hurtful things that I had is growing up in my life is I shouldn't say no, very few people looked at me as coachable moments. They looked at being frustrated by, behaviors or whatever I did. I didn't know until somebody taught me. It's the same thing in business. And more importantly, what we start to see is the fading or the significance of things like we need more communication. We're all working hard, but in a disconnected way. We need to be more aligned. What are our goals? Our follow through is not great. You start to hear less and less of those things, and you start to see more and more of the momentum. This also forces you to move closer to the truth of what the business needs. Remember, if a business could take you out to dinner, what would it tell you? And this starts to bring you closer to that. Mm-hmm. So we spent a big portion of this podcast talking about this because it is so important. This hope is not a strategy. And more importantly, what to do about not having to live that warning sign of success and the damage that causes to morale, to performance, burnout.
Hmm. So we started with structure and, just wrapped on strategy. You touched on this a little bit actually as you walked through the growth playbook. You talked about culture and dedicating time to culture. This last warning sign of success that we're going to cover in this episode, fake values.
So fake values are, quite simply, and maybe not so simple, are when our stated values don't match the lived behaviors. So when we have these set of behaviors and values that we say are important to us, but then we have like maybe special look the other way deals for what I call brilliant jerks.
Mhm.
People that are great performers but aren't culturally a great fit. Under pressure, we see where those values go out the window. And we maybe even have cultural awards where we're handing out awards for people that are doing these things. And people in the audience are just rolling their eyes saying, I don't understand it. I don't get it.
Mhm.
And so fake values is, one of the fastest ways to kill a culture is to protect and reward the wrong person for the wrong reasons. And this is where we're going to talk about this in an upcoming episode called The Iceberg of Ignorance. And this is where we've got to be able to get real truthful issues from the front line, so to speak, into the executive suite and everything in between there, because oftentimes these fake values go undetected. Sometimes as leaders, we think we're the emperor with no clothes in the sense that like we can get away with doing this. Nobody's watching, but everybody's watching and looking at these things. And when I tell people that are starting out and trying to figure out their values, here I'll draw something up here.
Yeah, go for it.
Is if this is a 10, 0, I guess everything needs to be a 10 or 0, right? Over here you have people. And over here you have performance. So on the vertical axis, you have people. On the horizontal, you have performance. So people that are a 10 on the people side of things, meaning that they care about what, it's supposed to be a heart, is, they really care about people. And they're good and not just nice. They're not just nice, but they care about developing people. They care about what they can, help, put into people and develop them and grow them. And they're great performers. They help the business grow. They're good about, reporting on their OKRs, and they absolutely produce in their area of responsibility. These people are the people that, we want to kind of keep going with, and the people that help the organization grow. The people that, they aren't great with people and their performance, heard me, I talked about this another one called the wonder, because everyone wonders why they're there. Okay. Now, when there's people that are really great with people and they care deeply about that, and they actually oftentimes will side with the people and not with the business. And what ends up happening is where the people win, but the business loses because they don't really advocate for the business. They're just kind of advocating for the people. What ends up happening is, these folks is where, like I said, the people win and the business loses. We've got to help them kind of understand that the dynamic of there's got to be a balance. It can't be where the people win and the business lose, but it also can't be down here where, the business wins, but the people lose, where all that matters is about the performance.
So how does this help somebody, just the way that they think about their values?
So the reason I drew this up here is because the people that end up in this quadrant, the people that are really good at developing people, pouring into them, and their performance, they're top performers in the business. So think about people in your business, okay, that are in this quadrant. This is how I tell people that are starting out how to really develop their values. This is a great way to do it. And I don't tell them this is what I'm doing. I'm just saying, like, tell me who the top performers are and tell me why. And I kind of start getting them talking about it. I said, well, what are those characteristics? And they'll go through and they'll say, oh man, they just show up. They're just there. I mean, they're always are asking and seeing how they can help others. And I can depend upon them. I trust them. Like when they say they're going to do something, they do it. And they just have this way about them that people are just attracted to them. Like when they walk into a room, people are excited to see them. And I said, those are your values.
Mm.
Those are the values that you guys are always going to want to hire. Those are the values that you guys are actually going to reward. Those are the ones that so those top performers that are already in the business or people that you maybe have worked with that you really admired, think about what those characteristics are. And those are probably the values. I see too many times where people come around with values and it becomes like this quilt of kind of half-baked ideas. They're aspirational, but they're not relational. They're not real. And so we start handing out these awards and rewards for things that we want everyone to be, but really no one is. But we felt like everybody needs to have their fingerprints on it. So this person kind of likes that word, and this person kind of likes this word, and they sound really good. And we've spent, $20,000 on having someone help us kind of craft this into a really cool thing. But oftentimes it's at the heart of who the people are that really they're the heartbeat of the business. And that's kind of what, this is going through. Whatever the names aren't really important. It's more about trying to focus on who are these people, the handful of people. If you could have 200 of them, you would take them in a second because they just fit. What is it that makes you drawn to them?
Yeah, that reminds me. There was an offsite we had where I was with our CEO and a couple others, and we had a conversation about this, about culture. And one of the persons in the room, she did advisory work for us on some branding stuff. And I won't forget it. She said, we did this exercise as we were kind of trying to rewrite the website and like, who are we? Like as a statement, we position us in the world. And she got on the topic of culture and values stated. And she had a very like passionate conversation about this with us where she said, your values seem like just an average of the team. And it was a really impactful statement because, ultimately we kind of agreed and said, actually, that's what we did. That was the exercise was we asked everybody what are the values? And we took the average of everyone's responses and ultimately, what that resulted in was something that was kind of half baked, that we weren't, no one was overly proud of it, kind of represented us well, wasn't totally clear. But also no one felt like completely alienated by it either. And so I think that makes me think of that example.
Yeah. And I think you're just kind of describing that process I'm talking where it kind of becomes a quilt work of kind of everyone's good thinking. And it feels like the right thing to do. And it feels like, if everybody feels like they're part of it, but when you step back from it, the business is a legal person with a tax ID number, but it doesn't have its own identity. It doesn't have its own soul or anything else like that. It depends upon you guys to give it. And if you give it something average, or not realistic, that's aspirational, I wish we could be all these things, then you once again, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit that target. And I've just seen it really work where people are like, here's what really matters. So like they just finally say it out loud. And that's okay. I have some people, once again, that this isn't a value per se, but they want people that are in the office. It's fairly unpopular and they say that out loud, but it's like, if that's what you want, you are just going to aggravate everyone that doesn't want that. And you're going to act like something you're not. And you're going to become a watered down version and a wandering generality. If that's really what you want, it may be harder to hire some of the people you want to hire and get the talent you want. Whatever. I'm not trying to debate that point right now. I'm just saying it's the same thing with values.
I think one of the things that's understated in what you just said too, describing two different types of companies. There's teams where that is the value and you've got to, like you say, cuss and discuss what that looks like. In earlier stage companies, a lot of companies take on the identity of the founder, of the co-founders, right? And so it's important that you don't muddy up or water down the values of the company or the identity of the company by trying to morph it to who you've hired to date and what they value, if that makes sense, but rather that you would lead with vision and lead with purpose.
Yep. Yeah. And it's, as we wrap up here, we've said this earlier and it's common saying is you hire people for their skill sets, for their resume, for what you hope they bring, but you become disenchanted. Remember that a third I talked about earlier? They usually move into that middle third or that last third because of their behaviors, because the values don't match.
Mhm. It's so interesting. There's a lot of questions I would ask on that, but
Mm.
I know that we've taken a while to go through this. So one quick question, I guess two real quick questions. I know if one of them is I wanted to talk about just what someone listening can do for this. We have a lot of assets we're going to link in the show notes that we've discussed here. But what's one practical thing that someone can do? And then the second question, you can answer these in any order you want, is how does all of this come together? The structure, the strategy, and the culture.
Mhm. So on the first question, what's one thing somebody could do is, this is overly obvious and embarrassingly simple, is if something spoke to you, because I don't know what that was, or it was maybe something I said or something that just kind of maybe got to the heart of the matter or which created confusion, whatever the case may be, reach out and ask a question. I can try to come up with some great idea on what's one thing you could do to apply these things. For me, I think I'd step back and say, where did it move me closer to the truth? And what is that? And what doors did that open, or questions did that create? And how can I use this? I've just spent, whatever time it is, an hour and a half of my life. How do I get better from this?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be intentional about it. Like I said, if information was enough, we'd all be skinny, rich, and happily married, and growing wildly successful businesses.
Right.
And as far as how does this all come together, all three of these dynamic warning signs of success reinforce themselves, interestingly enough, between hope is not a strategy and the symptoms that I talked about there, the fake values, all three of them work together to corrode a culture, really, to hurt a culture if they're left unchecked. And we leave them unchecked by starting to think that these patterns are normal, that these are just part of growing a business, until they start to destroy everything. And once again, they don't reveal themselves after the numbers turn red. They reveal themselves long before the numbers turn red. So these are the systems and the structures that the foundations for us being able to grow. And they're tools. Once again, we're giving 12 of these. These are tools that I want leaders to be able to use and say, are any of these things present? And the answer is probably yes, all three. And that's okay. But where am I going to spend my time? Where am I going to spend my emotional energy? Where am I going to reach out for help? How am I going to use my team and all of our collectively wonderful blind spots to help one another?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would summarize what you're saying as, leaders need to assess and ask the question, how are we going to grow? And not just assume you're going to get there, which plays a lot into the growth playbook, and hope is not a strategy. But then the underlying to that is, and why does that matter? Not growth, but why does it matter that we approach it from that angle for this team, for this company, and for this purpose?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing this. We'll link everything in the show notes that has been discussed here. We absolutely welcome people's feedback into this conversation, feedback into what's happening inside your own companies, and the ability just to continue the conversation beyond this episode.
Well, thank you, Spencer. I'm excited to keep going and keep digging.
Absolutely.
Keep climbing.
Yep. Let's climb.
Let's climb.
In episode 4, we uncovered the structural warning signs that quietly undermine scale. But what happens when the system looks solid, yet everything inside feels chaotic, disconnected, and just off? In episode 5, we'll explore the seductive chaos of opportunity overload, the dangerous disconnect between executives and the front lines, and how bad incentives quietly reward the wrong people and the wrong behaviors. If your team is burned out, unfocused, or just stuck in a cycle of heroic effort without real progress, this next conversation is for you.
Thank you for tuning in to the For You Leaders podcast with Kirk Dando. If this episode helped you think more clearly or act more decisively, that's good. But the journey doesn't stop there. Subscribe for more content on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or go to Kirk's website at kirkdando.com to inquire about coaching opportunities. Now think of a friend, family member, or business leader in your life. How could you help normalize their journey today? Share this podcast with them. We hope that this sparks meaningful conversations in your life and that it enables you to become the leader that you aspire to be.